If we are to continuously record one transaction every second, it would take us 15 years to finish recording the number of mobile payments in Nigeria made between January 2017 and April 2020. In a like manner, it would take 34 years to record the POS transactions at this rate and 87 years for ATM transactions. With this much transaction velocity in Nigeria, one would expect bank charges to be much lower. Instead, an active bank customer today pays well over 30,000 naira annually in bank charges. That's as if living under the growing double-digit inflation for 8 years straight is not hard enough. It is true that the Central Bank of Nigeria has been making frantic efforts to regulate bank charges. Nevertheless, these charges still deserve attention, and that's what we will consider today. Suppose a very active bank customer, let's call him Bill, maintains a savings account on which he makes 10 remote ATM withdrawals, 10 NIP transfers, 10 USSD airtime purchases, and 10 POS withdrawals every month. Even with the downward review of charges by the central bank, Bill will still incur the following charges. For the 10 remote ATM withdrawals, the current remote on-us charge is 35 naira per transaction after the third withdrawal in a month. This represents a 46% reduction from the former 65 naira per transaction. Let's assume Bill does not use his bank's ATMs, so 7 transactions are charged. Add the applicable value added tax and the 4 naira per SMS charges for 10 debit alerts. This SMS charge is strictly on cost recovery basis using telecom charges set with the cost model adopted by Nigeria Communications Commission (NCC) and not CBN. Also, don't forget the quarterly debit card maintenance. That takes 1/3 of the quarterly fee of 50 naira. Then we consider the 10 NIP transfers. The charge for NIP funds transfer is no longer a flat rate bold part figure of 50 naira. It is now graduated as 10 naira for transfers at and below 5,000 naira, 80% reduction anyway, 25 naira for transfers above 5,000 but not exceeding 50,000 naira, 50% reduction, and the former 50 naira charge remains for transfers above 50,000, no reduction here. So let's ratio the 10 NIP funds transfers that Bill makes in a month into 3 buckets based on NIB's 6 months data on electronic transfer patterns for 2019. We can say Bill makes 3 transfers below 5,000 naira, 1 above 50,000 naira, and the rest between. Again, we'll add the VAT to this and remember the SMS charges. In this case, for both the 10 OTPs sent and the 10 debit alerts, all at telecom charges. Next, for the 10 mobile USSD operations, CBN and NCC have jointly set a flat charge of 6 naira 98 kobo in 2021 to replace the former per 20-second session billing model. So we use this to compute the 10 USSD airtime transaction that Bill makes in a month. Of course, we'll add the SMS charges for the 10 debit alerts. At this point, it may seem to Bill that there are no issues. Bill may even be confident that his annual charges are bearable and reasonable. The problem sits with the merchant service charges attached to withdrawals done by POS terminals. Now, the main issue with the merchant service charge for POS withdrawals is that the Central Bank of Nigeria stopped regulating it by the circular released in November 2016 on the implementation of interchange fee, and instead, CBN made the charges for POS card acceptance services negotiable between the merchants, that's the POS agents, and the acquiring financial institution, which are the banks, subject to its interchange fee sharing regime. Then 5 months after releasing the Guide to Bank Charges, CBN issued the May 2020 Guidelines on Operations of Electronic Payment Channels in Nigeria, and therein in Section 2.6, CBN still retained POS charges on Naira card transactions as negotiable. Well, since customers are not privy to the negotiations between merchants and acquirers, the market convention is for customers to accept the POS charges as given. That's 100 naira for withdrawals not exceeding 5,000, 200 naira for those not exceeding 10,000, and 300 naira for withdrawals up to 20,000 naira, and thus repeating same in these multiples for withdrawals over 20,000. So back to the scenario. Bill makes 10 withdrawals in Naira via POS. Again, using NIB's same sample data on e-transaction patterns, we can ratio the 10 POS transactions into 3 buckets. That makes 3 withdrawals below 5,000 Naira, 4 above 10,000, and the rest between. Of course, the charges for SMS alerts come in here as well. And when all is said and done, we get a monthly and an annual figure. Surely POS charges seem to be higher, probably to accommodate a number of other players along the POS service value chain. But what can we say? 34,800 Naira annually. That beats minimum wage or competes with the price of a bag of rice. Even if Bill does just 5 transactions in a month on each of these platforms, his annual charge would be 16,300 Naira, which is still sizable today. And remember, there are a wide array of other charges that we didn't compute which may apply to Bill's account. Then again, just imagine if Bill has multiple active accounts with other banks. That would translate into multiple bags of rice donated on each of his accounts. And so far, we have just considered one customer. Here is data that put things in perspective. For a 5-year period between 2017 and 2021, 2.5 trillion Naira was realized in revenue from fees and commissions only by just 10 publicly quoted banks. Out of this sum, 49% represents revenue generated only from charges on accounts and e-transactions. These charges are hard to see because they come in trickles and never in bulk. Let's see what the law has to say in the next section. Now, high as these charges may be, that a charge is unfair does not always mean it is wrongful or illegal. Banking is a really long string of common law contracts which all stem from an initial basic contract. In the 2014 case of Linton Industrial Training Nigeria Limited against CBN and another party, the court described the relationship between a bank and a customer as involving a species of contracts with special usages with particular reference to monetary or commercial transactions. Under this string of contracts, banks are legally entitled to demand and take charges from customers as the consideration for bank services rendered. The long-standing position of the law of contract is that the consideration payable on a contract, that is the thing or deed due from one party in a contract, must only be sufficient. In other words, it must only be legal, specific, and possible, even if it is not adequate or even if the thing offered or the deed done is not of commensurate or equal value with the service received in return. This means that the law of contracts does not care if the pricing on a contract or service is unfair to any of the parties, provided the parties have so agreed on it. And whether a bank customer is ignorant of these charges at the time of performing these transactions would not matter, because a customer must have signed the embellishing contract for use of these platforms before these services will be enabled for that customer's use, unless of course the customer challenges the validity of the contract itself. Ordinarily, it may not be practicable for a bank to negotiate charges with every customer at the point of each transaction. That would be one onerous or overwhelming responsibility, and worse still, it would be disastrous for customers like Bill, who would be left at the mercy of negotiating with a stronger party in a contract, which are the banks. Besides, to allow solely profit-making entities like banks to control their charges and decide how and when to communicate these charges to a customer will make room for collaborative interbank monopoly on pricing. It is for these reasons that the Nigerian legislature thought it wise to heavily regulate the financial services sector. Section 57 of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act 2002 as amended empowers the central bank governor to make rules and regulation for the operation and control of all financial institutions under the supervision of the central bank. As such, even though the relationship between Bill and his bankers is contractual, the consideration or pricing on services rendered by the bank is controlled or capped at specific ceilings by CBN, unless where CBN permits otherwise, like it has done with the merchant service charge for POS transactions. And not just that alone, the central bank places steep requirements on banks for disclosure and communication of charges to customers. Yet, even with all these, customers still have issues with bank charges. We will see what measures CBN has put in place for enforcement of the guide to bank charges in the next part of this video.